The warning didn't come from Washington, it came from Ottawa. 1 in 3 Canadian firms now expect a recession within a year. Why? Because US tariffs, meant to protect, are quietly choking the very supply chains that keep both economies alive. When factories stall in Canada, shelves empty in America. And when trade freezes up north, the chill hits your wallet next. It didn't make front-page headlines in the United States, no breaking ticker on cable news. But across the border, in a sober quarterly release, the Bank of Canada quietly dropped a truth bomb. The country's business outlook remains subdued, and recession fears are rising. 1 in 3 firms surveyed said they now expect a recession within 12 months, up from just over 1 in 4 earlier this year. That might sound like a local concern, but it's not. Canada is America's largest trading partner, with roughly $2 billion in goods and services crossing the border every day. What happens to Canadian manufacturing, construction, and consumer demand directly affects U.S. jobs, prices, and supply chains. This is how an invisible recession begins, not with collapse, but with hesitation. Canadian companies are reporting rising input costs, raw materials, transportation, energy. Many trace those increases directly to tariffs and trade frictions with the United States. Steel and aluminum duties, agricultural restrictions, and complex origin rules have all made business more expensive and uncertain. The bank's business outlook indicator climbed slightly to -2.28 in Q3 2025 from -2.40 previously, but that number still sits well below the historical average. Translation: sentiment remains negative. Firms aren't confident enough to expand, hire, or invest. When confidence dies, growth dies quietly with it. Executives told the Bank of Canada they're cutting back investment, delaying expansion, and tightening spending until they can see what direction the U.S. trade policy takes. Many said their biggest uncertainty is how American tariffs will evolve, whether Washington will double down to protect local industries or soften in the face of slowing demand. And here's the hidden danger. When businesses stop investing, it doesn't just affect shareholders, it ripples through entire communities. Construction projects pause, equipment orders shrink, contractors go idle, and hiring plans vanish. That's where the average household feels it, not through headline inflation, but through the quiet absence of opportunity. The job that never opens, the raise that never comes, the small-town supplier that never gets the call back. Canada's trade exposure to the U.S. is massive. Around 75% of its exports head south. When the U.S. imposes tariffs or changes import rules, Canadian producers instantly feel the tremor. A mid-sized metal manufacturer in Ontario told the central bank that shipping components to U.S. clients now takes 3 to 4 weeks longer due to new compliance checks and paperwork, time that kills competitiveness. Another firm reported 15% higher input costs on imported machinery parts, much of it due to tariff pass-through from U.S. suppliers. Those costs don't vanish. They climb the supply chain until they reach consumers. Maybe not tomorrow, but soon. What's striking is that even with inflation moderating, businesses remain on edge. The survey showed that expectations for selling price growth have stabilized, meaning firms aren't raising prices aggressively anymore. Why? Because customers can't absorb more.
Prices aggressively anymore. Why? Because customers can't absorb more. That's the paradox. Companies face rising costs but weak demand. They're squeezed from both ends. And when margins vanish, layoffs follow. Already, several export-driven manufacturers have announced small-scale job reductions, citing reduced U.S. orders and tariff-related uncertainty. Economists warn that if this sentiment persists into early 2026, it could drag the Canadian economy into a shallow recession, one that quietly seeps across the border through supply linkages. Remember the old saying, when America sneezes, the world catches a cold. This time, it may be reversed. Let's look at the consumer angle. If a Canadian auto parts plant slows production, a Michigan factory that relies on those parts might face delays. That means slower car assembly, inventory shortages, and potentially higher vehicle prices for U.S. buyers. Similarly, if Canadian logistics firms pull back on cross-border shipments, transportation costs rise, squeezing retailers in both countries. From grocery chains to tech distributors, everyone pays a little more, and those tiny increases stack up for millions of families. By the time you notice it on your receipt, the real damage has already been done upstream. The psychological impact is equally dangerous. The BOC survey noted that business uncertainty remains elevated, a polite way of saying executives are afraid to make the wrong move. That fear filters down. Consumers, hearing recession and trade war, begin to spend less. Demand weakens, firms see weaker sales and cut back further. It's a loop, fear feeding on fear.
And while most Canadians still have jobs, many households are feeling squeezed by higher mortgage costs and stubborn prices. Add in the fear of job cuts and spending confidence erodes. When spending falls, so does growth. Across the border, U.S. policymakers frame tariffs as a weapon of strength, a way to protect domestic industries and level the playing field. But trade doesn't exist in isolation. Every action on one side of the border sets off a chain reaction on the other. The BOC survey explicitly cited U.S. tariffs and global trade tensions as key headwinds for Canadian business sentiment. The irony? These same policies are contributing to higher costs for American consumers too. Tariffs might shield a factory in Ohio, but they raise the price of inputs for thousands of downstream firms. The border may be political, but the economy is not. As 2025 nears its end, both nations face a shared vulnerability: overconfidence in protectionism. The data show the system is slowing, not crashing, but slowing economies are often where the real pain hides. Layoffs that happen quietly, small firms that close silently, families who just stop buying. In the next section, we'll go deeper. We'll look at what the Bank of Canada's warning really signals for 2026, how U.S. tariffs, Canadian caution, and global supply chains are converging into a continental slowdown that few people see coming.
What begins as hesitation in one country rarely stays there. When a trading partner like Canada tightens its belt, the impact radiates, quietly, mechanically, but inevitably. And the Bank of Canada's latest warning isn't just a local red flag, it's a mirror of what's coming for the broader North American economy. Let's start with the chain reaction. Canada's firms slow hiring, investment dries up, imports from the US decline. That means fewer orders for American suppliers, whether they make car components in Michigan, lumber equipment in Oregon, or tech systems in California. Those factories may not feel it instantly, but within months, production backlogs appear. When suppliers hurt, workers do too. In September alone, Canadian manufacturing output fell by 0.3%, with export-oriented sectors seeing the sharpest decline. It's small, but significant, especially when compared to the rising number of companies that cite tariff uncertainty as their top obstacle. These are not abstract numbers. Behind every percentage point are business owners hesitating on million-dollar decisions that shape real livelihoods. The Bank of Canada also noted that credit conditions are tightening, loans are harder to secure, and higher interest rates are biting. When businesses can't borrow to expand or bridge short-term gaps, they hunker down. That translates to less demand for equipment, raw materials, and labor. And remember, 75% of Canada's exports go straight to the US. That means the slowdown doesn't stop at the border, it simply changes direction.
Meanwhile, in the United States, consumers are still living with the aftershocks of higher prices caused by years of tariff escalation. Steel, aluminum, and agricultural tariffs have inflated costs across industries. A 2025 U.S. Chamber of Commerce estimate found that tariffs introduced since 2018 have cost American households an average of $1,200 per year in indirect price increases. That's the hidden tax nobody votes on. You don't see it on your bill, but you feel it in your grocery cart. Canadian businesses dependent on cross-border components are now passing some of those costs back through supply chains, making goods more expensive for both sides. Economists call it mutual inflation. Consumers call it stress. But here's the deeper problem. Confidence is collapsing faster than the data show. Confidence drives capitalism. When it erodes, economies slow not because of numbers, but because of fear. The Bank of Canada's report captured that perfectly. Firms aren't panicking, but they're paralyzed. They're waiting for clarity that isn't coming. And while policymakers debate rate cuts or tariff twigs, the real economy, the one made of truck drivers, factory workers, and small retailers, is quietly freezing. Let's zoom out. The US-Canada Economic Corridor has been one of the most stable partnerships in modern history. $900 billion in annual trade, integrated supply chains, and shared industrial ecosystems. Yet that interdependence is now the weakness. When Washington raises tariffs to protect US workers, it inadvertently raises costs for Canadian suppliers. When those suppliers slow production, US industries lose efficiency and pay more. It's an economic boomerang. The Bank of Canada didn't name Washington outright. Central banks rarely do, but the phrasing was clear. Trade tensions remain an important concern among businesses. That's diplomatic language for U.S. tariffs are hurting us. So what happens next? If confidence continues to weaken, the bank may be forced to cut interest rates sooner than expected. Markets are already pricing in at least one rate cut by early 2026. But cheaper credit won't fix broken trust. Businesses borrow when they believe in tomorrow. Right now, too many don't. And here's where it gets personal again. A construction slowdown in Canada means less demand for American lumber. Reduced factory output means fewer U.S. trucking contracts. Delayed investment in energy infrastructure means smaller export orders for American technology. Every link matters because these economies breathe in sync. When one holds its breath, the other starts gasping. The consumer picture isn't any brighter. According to the Bank of Canada's consumer survey, nearly 64% of households expect a recession within 12 months. That's the highest pessimism level since the pandemic years. Historically, such sentiment leads to a 2 to 3% reduction in discretionary spending within 6 months. Less travel, fewer restaurant visits, slower retail sales. Now imagine that sentiment spreading south. U.S. consumer demand has been propping up the North American economy through sheer momentum. But when people start hearing recession across the border in the same news cycle as rising tariffs, fear becomes contagious. The psychology of downturn travels faster than the downturn itself.
And this is where politics enters the story. In both countries, politicians sell tariffs as patriotic shield. Buy American, protect Canadian jobs, secure local supply chains. The slogans sound good until the math kicks in. Because when protectionism spreads across a shared border, it turns allies into reluctant rivals. Factories retool for domestic markets, investments stall in cross-border projects, and the most efficient supply chain in the Western Hemisphere starts to rust. The Bank of Canada's warning wasn't dramatic, it was clinical, but that's what makes it haunting. Central bankers don't deal in panic, they deal in probability. When 1 in 3 firms predicts recession, it means something in the system has cracked. So what's the solution? Experts argue that both Washington and Ottawa need to recalibrate trade policy before sentiment hardens into stagnation. That means renewed cooperation on tariffs, smoother customs frameworks, and clear signals to businesses that cross-border trade will remain stable. Economists say the key is restoring trust, not just in markets, but in predictability. Businesses can handle high costs, they can't handle uncertainty. If that predictability doesn't return soon, North America could enter a silent slowdown. No crashes, no chaos, just a long, slow squeeze where growth fades, jobs plateau, and consumers pay more for less. That kind of stagnation is harder to notice and harder to fix. Because every major recession in history begins the same way, with ignored warnings. In 2007, it was housing data. In 2020, it was supply chain fragility. And now it might be something as mundane as a business outlook survey. A survey that says, in the calm voice of a central banker, confidence is gone.
The warning didn't come from Washington, it came from Ottawa. And this time, if leaders don't listen, the next chill won't stop at the border. North America's economies were built on trust. Trust that goods would flow, that rules would stay stable, that neighbors would cooperate. But when tariffs rise and fear spreads, that trust weakens. Maybe the question now isn't whether a recession is coming, it's whether we'll recognize the warning before it hits home.